Belle's harem is growing. Damn. That harem is something to behold. Okay, so, as promised, from some Chibits that did some fan art, I have a couple little pieces of fan art I want to show you all, and sadly enough, no one made a Guts Hestia fan art, which I guess people didn't want to torture Guts that bad. But I do have a Coyote. I do have a Coyote fan art from a fellow Chibit, so I want to post it on the screen here for you all can see it. And yeah, I mean, let's get into this review of Dungeon Girl. So Dungeon Girl, this week's episode, it's setting up for a couple of things. For one thing that this episode really tries to show you is our main male character is increasing his harem. He's trying to grow his harem. And you see how a bunch of girls now are getting all around our main male character, and they're getting very jealous, or Hestia is getting very jealous. Let's correct that. Hestia is getting feisty and pissed. And I mean, seriously, Belle, why would you want any other girl? I mean, look at Hestia, okay? Fucking A, dude. She's all big boobs. That's what she is. And like, my God, just look at Hestia. So, thing is, okay, with this episode getting really on topic, Eyes and Belle have a conversation, and finally they have actual issues corrected in this episode. Since the first episode, as we know, Belle was saved by Eyes at the beginning of the series, and he's been running away from her ever since. And with this week's episode, he finally gets to talk with her, he finally doesn't run away, and they finally get to just have a chit-chat conversation, which eventually leads into Belle doing some physical training with Eyes. And so this is a really good start to Belle as a character, learning some martial arts, because the main focus of this episode was clearly two things that you could pull out of this episode, besides funny things with harems and stuff. Two main things you could pull out of this episode. For one, you have it to where Belle is learning martial arts from Eyes. He's getting better at hand-to-hand combat and be able to fight better with a lot of enemies surrounding him, which we get to see displayed in this week's episode of Dungeon Girl. When he gets surrounded by the enemies, he starts beating the shit out of them with his fist. And then the second part of this episode that you can actually really see that's starting to progress is whatever this dude is doing, this adventurer in the dungeon, he's messing with this Minotaur and he's beating the shit out of it and leveling it up or something. That's stuff that I want to talk about. This dude at the beginning of this episode, he's like, okay, so it doesn't look like I'm going to make it. It doesn't look like this is going to be enough. And you see him like holding those money crystals that, you know, adventurers get money from, and he's looking at it. And he says that, and all of a sudden he sees this, you know, big Minotaur come around the corner, has blood on his weapon, so you can assume that this Minotaur killed a person. And the Minotaur meets this dude, and this dude throws him a fucking sword, well, breaks the Minotaur's weapon, throws him a sword that he gave the Minotaur, and the Minotaur starts using it to fight with. And eventually, as it goes on, the dude is manhandling this Minotaur. Like, this Minotaur puts him up against the wall, he rips off his fucking horn, he's just wrecking this dude. Like, the Minotaur stands no chance. I actually feel very bad. And eventually it leads into where his weapon, the actual adventurer's weapon, gets broken, and he's like, okay, it seems like this is enough. And then you see the Minotaur glowing red. So, I'm assuming, I could be wrong, but I want to assume that either A, Minotaur can evolve, like Pokemon, or a Minotaur can level up, or the dungeon creatures can level up. One or the other. I'm assuming something like that's going to happen. Because if you think about it, this is kind of like an RPG. It's kind of like an RPG, like with the dungeon, you know how they're going down floors. And so it makes me assume that there has to be floor bosses. There has to be bosses, or mini-bosses. So maybe this dude is trying to create a boss. And that's what he was doing in this episode, like the entirety of this episode when it comes to beating the shit out of this Minotaur, trying to give this Minotaur experience to where it can level up or turn it into something else. And I'm going to assume the way that was done in this episode, that Minotaur is probably going to be too much to handle for that adventurer, and it's going to cause it to where Belle is going to have to fight it. I'm assuming something like that's going to happen, because it's very weird how in this episode, Eyes and Belle are training, and as we know, Belle kind of got the shit knocked out of him in the first episode thanks to a Minotaur, and in this episode, and the other focus besides Belle training, you have this Minotaur, looks like it's training. So yeah, clearly that Minotaur is going to eventually confront Belle, and Belle's probably going to have to fight it, or he's going to get the shit knocked out. One or the other, and it might be used to redeem Belle as a fighter to show that he has progressed as a warrior. Now, other things I want to mention too, you also have it when it comes to this episode, you have it to where Lily, she's progressing as a character. She's officially kind of joined the guild, Hestia's, you know, familia. And yeah, it's a really cool segment of this week's episode, just getting to see something like that. Very adorable, getting to see now how the Familia is growing. I'm looking forward to seeing where it's going to progress. And eventually, Hestia and Belle, they need to have, like, a new place to stay at. They need a new house or something. I mean, seriously, they're making a lot of money now. They need to buy a new fucking house. That's what I'd be doing, but... So yeah, that's about it. I mean, that's about it with this week's episode. There's a couple other things I could talk about, but I mean, this episode, it's self-explanatory. It really is. I don't think I need to dive in too deep to this week's episode, but it's, like I said, self-explanatory. So tell me your thoughts. How do you feel about this week's episode of Dungeon Girl? Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? How do you feel about it? I love you all so much. Please be safe. Chibi out.